Hello everyone, welcome to SwitchUp and to another episode of our Battle in the Backlog series, where I have a look at my quite substantial backlog and try to tick 6 games off, giving you a mini review of sorts of my experiences with each game, letting you know if ultimately I believe they were worth my time. So which 6 games have I ticked off the backlog? Well, let's find out. Going in order of completion then, the first game was Super Mario Land on the Nintendo Switch Online app, the Game Boy version of course. This is an absolute classic and a game that I've played and completed many times over the years in its original form on the Game Boy, on the 3DS Virtual Console, and now completed it on the Nintendo Switch. I played this as soon as it was added to the Switch app a few months ago now, and it took me about half an hour to complete, which is about standard for this game, but one thing I did do this time, which I've never done before, is finish it without losing a life. As different as this is to a lot of the other Mario games, obviously it was a very early game on the Game Boy, and they were still working out what the hardware could do. I do think this is a very solid platformer. It's not just nostalgia talking. If you do have the Game Boy app, I would advise you to give this one a go. There are things you might not expect if you've never played it before, such as the way the flower power-up works. You shoot almost like cannonballs into the ground and they bounce up as opposed to the fire bullets you may expect. And there are a couple of almost shoot-'em-up levels in there too, but it's a great little game. Beautiful music, absolutely fantastic chiptune music, well worth your time if you do have that app. Next then, I finished Agatha Christie Murder on the Orient Express, which is a game that comes via Microids, and I played this one through with my wife. These are the sort of games that we enjoy to play together. They're not multiplayer games per se, but games that you can play with another person, discussing what's happening, offering advice, and they're quite easy to control as well, which means that if one of the two of you is not as experienced with controlling games, they can take over and feel quite confident they won't make a mistake. This ties in to the character Hercule Poirot and is based on the very famous novel, of course, with a murder happening on the legendary Orient Express commute, with Poirot having to work out exactly which of the passengers or staff committed the murder. It does take things in a slightly different direction. I haven't read the source material, I must say, but from what I've heard, at least, in that there is a new side story where one of the other passengers is a police detective who was investigating a previous case, and this then ties into the murder on the Orient Express, and you will play as that character at times in flashbacks, fleshing out the story. There's also almost like an epilogue chapter which takes place after the final reveal, which I felt was unnecessary, I must say. I think they could have just ended it at the point that you'd expect. If this part is in the book, I don't think it is, but if it is, apologies if you are a fan of the novel. I just felt it over elongated the story and didn't really add too much. On the whole though, it's a good mix of exploration around the train, investigative parts as you search crime scenes for clues or interrogate the other passengers, and a few puzzle segments too. I quite like this game, my wife enjoyed it too. Probably one for a sale, I would say, but definitely worth your time if you have any sort of interest in the novel or in the crime solving game genre. It took about 12 hours to finish, but yeah, I'd say wait for a sale.
A meeting place on the back of a postcard. Someone with the initials AW.
The next one then was one for review, although I played it way past review. I got very addicted to this one, I must say. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate. This, I believe, is still my highest score for the year, certainly right up there, and it's basically a Turtles roguelite, very similar to something like Hades. You'll be able to choose as one of the 4 turtles and make your way on runs, being given a number of different skills or passive abilities as you go through each of the screens, ultimately having to take down Shredder, and you'll do this a number of times if you want to get the true ending, which is what I'm considering as completion for it to be in this video. I think it's 8 times in total you need to beat him for it to officially count as you having finished the game and see the end credits, but obviously you can play it past that if you wish. There is also meta progression in terms of different coins that you can get, and you can then buy upgrades to your characters, be it more health, boosting their specific powers or weapons, or even increasing the percentage chance of getting particular elements or powers that you like when going on the runs. It took me 20 hours to finish, and I must have done that over the course of a weekend. Now that might not sound a lot to some people, I appreciate that, but you have to appreciate me, a married man with 2 kids, I don't spend 20 hours playing a video game over a weekend. But from a Friday night session all the way through to the Sunday, I just absolutely smashed it. I couldn't stop playing it, really enjoyed it, and it's up there so far as one of my games of the year. I'll put a link to the full review in the top right hand corner if you want the full story, but yeah, about 20 hours to get the definitive ending, if you like. 20 hours very well spent as far as I'm concerned. Then we had one that I'd wanted to play for quite a long time, but I was waiting to find the physical version of it, which is quite hard to come by these days because it was released via limited run games. This is Return of the Obra Dinn. I finally managed to get a copy of it for a good price, a price that I was happy to pay, and I played it through with my wife, another one, very similar actually to the Orient Express game in that you are solving a crime. Doesn't work in quite the same way, I'll get to that in a moment, but it's another game where you can just discuss the outcomes, help each other with the puzzles, offer advice, etc. with someone that generally doesn't play video games. So this one is about the titular Obra Dinn ship, which mysteriously disappeared and then just as mysteriously reappeared some years later. You work for an insurance company and have to make your way onto the Obra Dinn to try and ascertain exactly what happened, as none of the crew have returned with the ship. As you enter the ship, you will use a mysterious watch or compass, I think it was a watch, I can't quite remember, which will replay the deaths of the crew, and you need to use these visions to then identify each crew member going by the crew list that you're given by the insurance company. Obviously the reason to do this is to see if any of the families are owed compensation, etc. And it transpires that something quite supernatural has happened whilst the ship was out on its voyage. It uses a very interesting art style, like a monochrome art style, and it's quite a difficult game actually, especially to start with. There are so many different crew members that you need to try and identify. You'll be watching these visions, not quite sure exactly what it's showing you before you start to get into it and really start picking up the nuances of everything that's going on, little name drops, things that are going on in the background, power of deduction, process of elimination, and you'll start to filter through and identify each member. I think there were 60 in total and it took about 9.5 hours. We did really power through it towards the end, so like I said, it does get easier as you start to get your head around what you're doing. But a really good game. I wouldn't necessarily recommend looking for the physical version because it is quite expensive, but of course it's on the eShop, and if you find it on sale, all the better. Very much recommended though, and a good one to play with a partner. This next one was another one I wanted physically. It is on the eShop otherwise, of course. This is DreadOut 2. Now this is a horror game and it follows a schoolgirl who, after the events of the first DreadOut, which is a game I hadn't played, but it does do a previously on segment just to get you up to speed, is haunted by a spirit and must look into the lore of exactly what's happening to try and break a curse. Now I will say, first and foremost, it is quite unpolished, for want of a better phrase. There are moments that don't mesh very well, but I did on the whole really enjoy it. It's one of those games that's a bit of a raw gem, more so because of the atmosphere it conveyed. I thought it did a very good job actually of almost showing the parts that horror movies show that horror games usually leave out for the sake of pacing. I spoke about this in one of our interesting games videos, and I mentioned a part where you go to hospital and you go up to the counter, you're given a number, you're told to take a seat. And then the game doesn't go into a cutscene, like you still control the character, or at least the camera, as you're sitting in this seat, and you're kind of waiting for something to happen, and then your character falls asleep, and then you wake up and the hospital is empty, and obviously then things go awry. But I just really appreciated these moments, more so perhaps than the actual gameplay. I feel like it's taken a few influences, things like Due on the Grudge. The main mechanic revolves around you using your iPhone or the camera on your iPhone to get rid of the spirit, so obviously there's some Project Zero or Fatal Frame in there too. And there was another survival horror game called Obscure, I seem to remember back in the day, it reminded me of that. A Nightmare on Elm Street, certainly, in terms of sometimes not knowing if you're asleep or awake, definitely has taken some inspiration from a few different places. Yeah, it's a game I wouldn't necessarily recommend, because I think sometimes if you're recommended a game, people expect top quality, and that's not what's here. But if you can find it on sale and you do like your survival horror games, you can do a lot worse, I'll say it that way. I imported the physical from PlayAsia because I do have a bit of a physical horror game sub-collection, if you like, going on with my Switch collection, so I wanted it for that. Yeah, a decent game, but definitely not without its flaws. Just a final point on this one before I move on. I should mention that if you are importing the physical version, it doesn't come with English as the default language, but it does have English on there. You just need to navigate your way to the options menu and find the English option. So there'll be a 5-minute spell of trying to figure that bit out, but after that, once you've clicked English, obviously the rest of the game will play with English subtitles. And the final game, which I finished just a few days ago, another horror game actually. This is Spirit Hunter Deathmark 2. So this is a visual novel based around a character called the Spirit Doctor. It's a man that can communicate with spirits or see spirits when others can't. And talking about Ju-on in the previous entry, this again deals with the idea of a grudge. People that died in quite an horrific way, which manifests as a grudge, an angry spirit that wants to take vengeance. So the first game was all about this main character finding that he had a death mark, and he needed to help the spirit who had the grudge pass on to relieve himself of this death mark. And there were a number of different characters that had the same that came to him for help. This time round it's different. You are recruited by a headmaster of a school as weird messages like notices are being pinned on the notice board from something called the Departed threatening to kill students. You need to look into each case and try to solve them, and characters from the previous game do make a return. The biggest difference this time round is that the exploration segments in the first game were done from a first person perspective, almost like the old dungeon crawlers where you walked around the locations looking for clues. Here it's done from a side on 2D view, and I'll be honest, I didn't mind it. It was probably easier than the previous game to navigate around, but I did miss the creepy feeling of those first person views from the first game. You'll run into spirits every so often and you need to almost negotiate with them. You need to use the items that you found to try and placate them and keep yourself alive, and you have spirit energy that serves as your health but is also how you use each item, so you'll be using some of your health each time basically in every act that you perform. I didn't find the story as interesting initially as the first game, I must say. I felt it got better towards the end. In that final chapter where it ties everything together, I think it really did peak. But I'm still pleased that I played it. It's a game that I've wanted to play for a while. I got this one for Father's Day off of the wife, or off of the kids via the wife, you know what it's like. Having really enjoyed the first game, I wanted to give this one a go. And it's another game for that horror sub-collection that I mentioned a minute ago. It took about 20 hours to finish, one that I just plugged away at an hour or so each night for a while. If you like your visual novels, you can do a lot worse. I would say there are better ones, and I would recommend either the first one in this series or its spin-off game, which is called Spirit Hunter NG, which is very good also. That one focuses on different characters. So there you have it, another 6 games off the backlog. Some I breezed through, as I said, some took a bit longer, some I really enjoyed, others I didn't mind, but would probably wait for a sale, as I mentioned a minute ago. Do let me know of any games that you've completed recently and whether you felt they were worth your time and money. It's always interesting to see what other people are playing and finishing. And don't forget, if you're looking for eShop credit to pick any of these games up, you can get your eShop cards via our website, switchup.gg. Doing so will get you 5% of your purchase price back as cashback. And there's a link down there to PlayAsia. As I mentioned, that's where I got the DreadOut 2 game. If you do want to import anything, use the link, use the code stated, and you'll get yourself 5% off of your order from there. A quick thank you to our patrons and our channel members for your continued support, and to each and every one of you for watching our videos. Take care, and until next time, happy gaming.